The early Slavs were a diverse group of tribal societies who lived during the migration period and early Middle Ages in Eastern Europe, and established the foundations for the Slavic nations through the Slavic states of the High Middle Ages. The first written use of the name Slavs dates to the 6th century, when the Slavic tribes inhabited a large portion of Central and Eastern Europe. By that century, native Iranian ethnic groups had been absorbed by the region's Slavic population. Over the next 2 centuries, the Slavs expanded southwest toward the Balkans and the Alps and northeast towards the Volga River. Beginning in the 9th century, the Slavs gradually converted to Christianity. By the 12th century, they were the core population of a number of medieval Christian states: the East Slavs in Kiev and Rus, the South Slavs in Bulgaria, Croatia, Bosnia and Serbia, and the West Slavs in Poland, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Kingdom of Hungary. Overview. The meaning of Slav depends on the context in which it is used. The word can refer to a culture living north of the river Danube, east of the river Elbe, and west of the river Vistula during the 530s CE. Slav is also an identifier for the ethnic groups shared by these cultures, and denotes any language with linguistic ties to the modern Slavic language family. Despite these concepts of Slav, it is unclear whether any of the descriptions add to an accurate representation of the group's history. Historians such as George Vernadsky, Florin Kurta, and Michael Karpovich have questioned how, why, and to what degree the Slavs were a cohesive society between the 6th and 9th centuries. When discussing evidence used to construct a history of the Slavs, the information fall into 3 avenues of research: archaeological, historiographic, and linguistic. Archaeologically, early Slavic physical evidence ranges from hill forts, ceramic pots and fragments to abodes. However, archaeologists face difficulties distinguishing Slavic and non-Slavic findings. Many of these findings are inaccurately radiocarbon dated, or so isolated that they do not reflect organized Slavic settlement. Although a number of sources describe the Slavs, there are several problems with using the texts to build upon available knowledge of the early Slavs as useful historical information about the Slavs from them is cryptic. It does not identify the source. The works tend to discuss the Slavs only in terms of their effects on surrounding empires, particularly the Byzantines and the Franks. The variety of names referring to the Slavs, such as Antes, Sclavony, and Venethi, and the regions they may have occupied make it difficult to establish geographical boundaries of major settlement. Place names have changed or no longer survive, and most texts are second-hand accounts that describe an encounter with the Slavs years, decades, or centuries after it occurred. Earlier texts contextualize the Slavs' early history and development, but those written long after an event are less reliable. Linguistic study of Slavic history has focused on 3 main areas: place names, the names of flora and fauna, and lexical and structural similarities and differences between Slavic and other languages. The Slavs were described by the neighbors as Antes, Sclavony, and Venethi in texts written during and after the 500s. The concept of ethnicity during this period was fluid. More than one ethnicity would be ascribed to a group, depending on the circumstances of the encounter. This map of Slavic settlement during the 6th century relative to the neighbors drawn from written fragments, amidst source information which contradicted Parchevsky's conclusions. The association by archaeologists of pot and burial styles with ethnonyms and the selective use of historical materials assumes a connection between Language and ethnicity. Ethnic identification can be subjective, especially in a region where many tribal groups identified themselves as distinct from one another. The history of the early Slavs is inseparable from political agendas underlying much 19th and 20th century archaeological, linguistic, and historiographic research. According to Florin Curta, the creation of such a history was a function of both ethnic formation and ethnic identification. The process was blurred by a number of interests, including pan-Slavic researchers in Central and Eastern Europe. During the 18th and 19th centuries, European nations strengthening the legitimacy after World War II, and a contemporary politicization of historical, archaeological, and linguistic discourse. Homeland. The Slavic languages, with about 300 million speakers in 2006, are a major branch of the Indo-European language family. All known Slavic languages share a number of features, which suggests that they evolved from mutually intelligible dialects spoken in a relatively restricted core area. Although the former common language is not attested in written sources, it can be reconstructed by studying its daughter languages. The similarities among the daughter languages indicate that Common Slavonic was spoken during recorded history, with its division into daughter languages beginning in the 9th century AD. The Proto-Slavic homeland is the area of Slavic settlement in Central and Eastern Europe during the first millennium AD, with its precise location debated by archaeologists, ethnographers and historians. Theories attempting to place Slavic origin in the Near East have been discarded. None of the proposed homelands reaches the Volga River in the east, over the Danube Alps in the southwest of the Balkan Mountains in the south, or past Bohemia in the west. Frederick Cortland has suggested that the number of candidates for Slavic homeland may rise from a tendency among historians to date proto-languages farther back in time than is warranted by the linguistic evidence, although all spoken languages change gradually over time. In the absence of written records, that change can be identified by historians only after a population has expanded and separated long enough to develop daughter languages. The existence of an original home is sometimes rejected as arbitrary, because the earliest origin sources always speak of origins and beginnings in a manner which presupposes earlier origins and beginnings. According to historical records, the Slavic homeland would have been somewhere in Central Europe, originated in the 7th century BC, 1st century AD culture of northern Ukraine and southern Belarus. According to the Chernolese culture theory, the pre-Proto-Slavs originated in the 1025 to 700 BC culture of northern Ukraine and the 3rd century BC, 1st century AD's Rubantsi culture. According to the Lusatian culture or hypothesis, they were present in northeastern Central Europe in the 1300 to 500 BC culture and the 2nd century BC, 4th century AD Praworsk culture. The Danube Basin hypothesis, postulated by Oleg Trubachev and supported by Florin Curta and Nestor's Chronicle, theorizes that the Slavs originated in Central and Southeastern Europe. Linguistics. Proto-Slavonic began to evolve from Proto-Indo-European, the reconstructed language from which a number of languages spoken in Eurasia originated. Slavic languages share a number of features with Baltic languages, which may indicate a common Proto-Balto-Slavic phase in the development of the two of the Indo-European linguistic branches. Frederick Cortland places the territory of this common language near the Indo-European homeland. The Indo-Europeans who remained after the migrations became speakers of Balto-Slavic, However, geographical contiguity, parallel development and interaction may explain the existence of these language group characteristics. Proto-Slavonic developed into a separate language during the first half of the second millennium BC. The Proto-Slavonic vocabulary, inherited by its daughter languages, described its speakers' physical and social environment, feelings and needs. Proto-Slavonic had words for family connections, including svekri and zedli. Inherited Common Slavic vocabulary lacks detailed terminology for physical surface features peculiar to mountains of the steppe, the sea, coastal features, littoral flora or fauna, or saltwater fish. Proto-Slavonic hydronyms have been preserved between the source of the Vistula and the middle basin of the Dnieper. Its northern regions are joint territory where river names of Baltic origin abound. On the south and east, it borders the area of Iranian river names. A connection between Proto-Slavonic and Iranian languages is also demonstrated by the earliest layer of loanwords in the former, the Proto-Slavonic. Words for god, demon, house, axe and dog are of Scythian origin. The Iranian dialects of the Scythians and Sarmatians influenced Slavic vocabulary during the millennium-long contact between them and early Proto-Slavic. A longer, more intensive connection between Proto-Slavonic and the Germanic languages can be assumed from the number of Germanic loanwords, such as *duma, *kupt, *mec, *selm, and *xlm. The common Slavonic words for beach, larch and yew were also borrowed from Germanic, which led Polish botanist Joseph Rostofinski to place the Slavic homeland in the Pripyat marshes. Germanic languages were a mediator between Common Slavonic and other languages. The Proto-Slavonic word for emperor was transmitted from Latin through a Germanic idiom, and the Common Slavonic word for church came from Greek. Common Slavic dialects before the 4th century AD cannot be detected. All daughter languages emerged from later variants. Tonal word stress is present in all Slavic languages, and Proto-Slavonic reflects the language probably spoken at the end of the first millennium. Historiography. Jordanus, Procopius and other late Roman authors provide the probable earliest references to southern Slavs in the second half of the 6th century. Jordanus completed his Gothic history in Constantinople in 550 or 551. He also used additional sources, books, maps or oral tradition. Jordanus wrote that Venethi, Sclavines and Antes were ethnonyms referring to the same group. His claim was accepted more than a millennium later by Wariniec Sarawiecki, Pavel Joseph Safarik and other historians, who searched the Slavic Heimat in the lands where the Venethi lived during the last decades of the 1st century AD. Pliny the Elder wrote that the territory extending from the Vistula to Enangia was inhabited by the Sarmati, Huns, Siri and Hiri. Procopius completed his 3 works on Emperor Justinian I's reign during the 550s. Each book contains detailed information on raids by Sclavines and Antes on the Eastern Roman Empire, and the history of the wars has a comprehensive description of the beliefs, customs, and dwellings. Although not an eyewitness, Procopius had contacts among the Sclavine mercenaries fighting on the Roman side in Italy. Agreeing with Jordanes's report, Procopius read that the Sclavines and Antes spoke the same languages but traced their common origin not to the Venethi but to a people he called Sporwar. Sporwar is equivalent to the Latin Semnons and Germani. German linguist Jacob Grimm believed that Suebi meant Slav. Jordanus and Procopius called the Suebi Suavi. The end of the Bavarian geographer's list of Slavic tribes contains a note: Suevi are not born, they are sown. The language spoken by Tacitus Suevi is unknown. In his description of the emigration of the Heruli to Scandinavia, Procopius places the Slavs in Central Europe. A similar description of the Sclavines and Antes is found in the Strategikon of Morris, a military handbook written between 592 and 602 and attributed to the Byzantine emperor. Its author, an experienced officer, participated in the Eastern Roman campaigns against the Sclavines on the lower Danube at the end of the century. A military staff member was also the source of Theophylact's Mokata's narrative of the same campaigns. Although Martin of Braga was the first Western author to refer to a people known as Sclavis before 580, Jonas of Bobbio included the earliest lengthy record of the nearby Slavs in his Life of St. Columbanus. Jonas referred to the Slavs as Veneti, noting that they were also known as Sclavi. Western authors, including Fredegar and Boniface, preserved the term Venethi. The Franks, Lombards and Anglo-Saxons referred to Slavs in the Elbe-Saale region and Pomerania as Wenden or Winden. The Franks and Bavarians of Styria and Carinthia called the Slavic neighbors Windish. The unknown author of the Chronicle of Fredegar used the word Venedi to refer to a group of Slavs who were subjugated by the Avars. In the Chronicle, Venedi formed a state which emerged from a revolt led by the Frankish merchant Samo against the Avars around 623. A change in terminology, the appearance of Slavic tribal names instead of the collective Sclavines and Antes, occurred at the end of the century. The first tribal names were recorded in the second book of the Miracles of St. Demetrius, around 690. According to Florin Curta, the change indicates pre-existing differences among Slavic groups. Although Sclavine may have originally been the ethnonym of a particular ethnic group, it became a purely Byzantine construct, an umbrella term for various groups living north of the Danube frontier, which were neither Antes nor Huns or Avars. The unknown Bavarian geographer listed Slavic tribes in the Frankish Empire around 840, and a detailed description of 10th-century tribes in the Balkan Peninsula was compiled under the auspices of Emperor Constantine VII. Porphyrogenitus in Constantinople around 950. Archaeology. In the archaeological literature, attempts have been made to assign an early Slavic character to several cultures in a number of time periods and regions. The Prague-Korchak cultural horizon encompasses postulated early Slavic cultures from the Elbe to the Dniester, in contrast with the Dniester to Dnieper-Prinkovka culture. Prague culture refers to Western Slavic material grouped around Bohemia, Moravia and Western Slovakia, distinct from the Mogila and Korchak groups further east. The Prague and Mogila groups are seen as the archaeological reflection of 6th-century Western Slavicis. The 2nd to 5th century Chernyakov culture encompassed modern Ukraine, Moldova and Wallachia. Chernyakov finds include polished black pottery vessels, fine metal ornaments and iron tools. Soviet scholars, such as Boris Rybakov, saw it as the archaeological reflection of the Proto-Slavicis. The Chernyakov zone is now seen as representing the cultural interaction of several peoples, one of which was rooted inside those Sarmatian traditions, modified by Germanic elements introduced by the Goths. The semi-subterranean dwelling with a corner hearth later became typical of early Slavic sites, with Volodymyr Baron calling it of Slavic ethnic badge. In the Carpathian foothills of Podolia at the northwestern fringes of the Chernyakov zone, the Slavs gradually became a culturally unified people. The multi-ethnic environment of the Chernyakov zone presented a need for self-identification in order to manifest the differentiation from other groups. The Praworsk culture northwest of the Chernyakov zone extended from the Dniester to the Tisa Valley and north to the Vistula and Oder. It was an amalgam of local cultures, most with roots in earlier traditions modified by influences from the Latin culture. Gistov culture beyond the Oder and the Belgrave culture of the Polish plain. The Venethi may have played a part. Other groups included the Vandals, Burgundians and Sarmatians. East of the Przeworsk zone was the Zarubinets culture, sometimes considered part of the Przeworsk complex. Early Slavic hydronyms are found in the area occupied by the Zarubinets culture, and Irina Rusinova proposed that the most prototypical examples of Prague-type pottery later originated there. The Zarubinets culture is identified as Proto-Slavic, or an ethnically mixed community which became Slavicized. With increasing age, the confidence with which archaeological connections can be made to known historic groups lessens. The Chernolese culture has been seen as a stage in the evolution of the Slavs, and Maria Gimbutas identified it as the Proto-Slavic homeland. According to many prehistorians, ethnic labels are inappropriate for European Iron Age peoples. The globular amphora culture stretched from the Middle Dnieper to the Elbe during the late 4th and early 3rd millennia BC. It has been suggested as the locus of a Germano-Balto-Slavic continuum, but the identification of its bearers as Indo-Europeans is uncertain. The area of this culture contains a number of tumuli typical of Indo-Europeans. The 8th to 3rd century BC Chernolese culture, sometimes associated with Herodotus's Scythian farmers, is sometimes portrayed as either a state in the development of the Slavic languages or at least some form of late Indo-European ancestral to the evolution of the Slavic stock. The Milorgrad culture, centered roughly in present-day Belarus and north of the Chernolese culture, has also been proposed as ancestral for the Slavs of the Balts. The ethnic composition of the Przeworsk culture, associated with the Lugi of central and southern Poland, northern Slovakia and Ukraine, including the Zarubintsi culture and the Oksiwi culture, are other candidates. Southern Ukraine is known to have been inhabited by Scythian and Sarmatian tribes before the Goths. Early Slavic stone stelae found in the Middle Dniester region are markedly different from the Scythian and Sarmatian stelae of the Crimea. The wheelbark culture displaced the Eastern Oksiwi culture during the 1st century AD, although the 2nd to 5th century Chernyakov culture triggered the decline of the late Sarmatian culture from the 2nd to 4th centuries. The western part of the Przeworsk culture remained intact until the 4th century, and the Kiev culture flourished from the 2nd to the 5th centuries. The latter is recognized as the predecessor of the 6th and 7th century Prague, Korchak and Penkovo cultures. The first archaeological cultures identified as Slavic, although Proto-Slavic probably reached its final stage in the Kiev area. There is disagreement in the scientific community about the Kiev culture's predecessors. Some scholars trace it from the Ruthenian Milorgrad culture, others from the Ukrainian Chernolese and Zarubintsi cultures, and still others from the Polish Przeworsk culture.